on the cloud. Apparently it's recording right now. Now, I think Mario, last time, you said that last time it didn't actually record the screen though, right? It just recorded audio?
No, it was recording. It was recording the screen and the audio.
It was recording both?
Yeah.
Okay.
The one that's
the opposite. So okay, great. So I'm just going to start this off. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through select exercises from 11.1 through 11.3, and we're going to go over the concepts that we covered so far. So the first thing that we want to do is, I mentioned to some of the students that got here earlier, I think the Northwestern students got here earlier, I linked out a, let's see, where is it? If I go to the top over here, I linked out this document. And Mozilla developer documentations, like semi-official, they do a really good job of documenting like how ECMAScript has developed over the years, and they're pretty good on keeping up to date. It's very technical, but this link that I have here, I think it does a really good job of going through objects and how objects work within the scope of JavaScript, and how it differentiates itself from other class-based object-oriented languages. So I'd highly recommend going through these, not like, you know, really going in depth and memorizing or anything like that, just getting a decent conceptual overview of that. And it goes step by step. So, you know, this one first, then this one, this one, this one, this one. And then they do some practice. They show you different ones of doing that, and then adding features for a bouncing balls demo, something like that. I have no idea what that is. But it is it's relatively interactive. Like, they don't have videos or anything, but they do take you through exercises. There's a lot of examples. So I really recommend that. So what I'm going to do is start off with 11.1. And before I start, do you guys have any questions? All right, so what I'm going to do is, if anyone does have questions, please type in the chat room first and just write question. And what I'll do is I'll wait for you to unmute yourself and then ask the question or type the question out. So in the meantime, if everyone else could just please mute their chat rooms or mute their microphones there. And then what I'm going to do is just get this started. Cool. So let's go to activities for 11.1. And let's go to the Tamagotchi. So the Tamagotchi was an application that we created together in class. And it's a nostalgic look at the 90s. And it's also a pretty good use case for how constructor functions work. Now, so far we've gone into creating objects within JavaScript using object literals. So if I open this up, I go to Tamagotchi, you're going to notice a bunch of code, and we're going to ignore that for now. Let's say that you wanted to create an object before. And an object, remember, is nothing more than a collection of properties and values. You can represent anything as a collection of properties and values, like, you know, a human being, a chair, generally any type of object. Now, we use this these objects as a form of abstraction, meaning that we want to structure information into this abstraction such that we can then utilize the information in the object and be able to set and get information from it and utilize the methods from that object as well. And we've done this before using something like this. So if we have, you know, digital pal, let's just use what's down here. We didn't uppercase, so we used them like this, just use camel case. And what we did was use these curly braces. Now these curly braces, again, they represent the object literal. That's just the syntax name. From there, what we do is if we had properties, we would set them as hungry. And in this case, it has false, so I'm just going to do the same thing. and we would just follow this convention. And what am I doing? False. There we go. Board always. No. Okay. So age 0 to start off with. So this is us creating a set of properties and values to start off with an object. And we were able to change the values of the object using two different kinds of notation. We start off with dot notation and bracket notation. So if we have dot notation, let's say I wanted to make hungry equal true. I just do that, and during runtime, what will happen is initially this will be set to digital pet with these different properties and values, but then when I execute this, digital pal will be set to hungry is equal to true. Now what I'm going to do is, I don't like to just talk, I want to execute, right? So we're going to do some console.logging. What I'm going to do is just print out digital pal. And what I'm going to do is let's see. So we have digital pal. I'm just going to use Node to execute Tamagotchi this. And notice that right now I commented on everything else. And all I did was console.log the digital pal object. Now remember that Node runs on top of the Chrome V8 engine. So this console.log, the output that you're seeing is very similar to the one that you see in the console inside of your Chrome browser. Because they're running the same REPL environment. So when I execute this, I have node Tamagotchi-this.js, and the object being outputted is the object itself represented by these curly braces along with the properties and values. Now notice that hungry is, instead of being false, it's being set to true. Now I can also determine, okay, well, maybe just start off true to begin with. So why don't I print this out first? What I'll do is I'll separate this and I'll say digital pal before set, and over here I'll do digital pal after set. And this should all just be reviewed. So notice that hungry is false before we change it, and then digital pal after set is true. Any questions so far? I'll wait a few seconds. And make sure everyone mutes. I think someone is unmuted. So if you do have a question, then unmute yourself. Otherwise, just mute yourself. Cool. All right. So I'm going to move on. All right. So this was an interesting way of doing things. And you can actually make this more dynamic using the object literal syntax, and then start going into prototyping from here to create new objects. But we are going to use a different way of creating objects in a more dynamic fashion. And that's where constructor functions come in, right? So constructor functions are just functions inside of JavaScript. And what they're meant to do is emulate the class-based behavior that you see in classical object-oriented programming languages. So can anyone give me examples of classical object-oriented programming languages that use classes? Yes, Java. C++, yes.
C#.
C#, yes. other ones too. Python, Ruby, JavaScript, technically not. And from the documentation that I sent out, you'll see that it doesn't actually have true class-based inheritance. It has object-based prototypal inheritance. It actually makes it easier to understand once you start reading it. It actually is, I think, for me, makes more sense to inherit other properties and objects from, because you're just saying, okay, I have an object and I inherit from this other object, and what's at the very top of the chain is just an object, as opposed to this concept of a class, which is an abstraction in itself, and then you're just creating things off of this abstraction. Anyway, so what we have here is this function. So notice that we have this digital pal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out all the stuff I have here, and I'm going to uncomment all this stuff. Now there's a lot to it, so I'm going to go a little slow. Notice that in our in-class activity, we had to create a digital pal. Now, if you're trying to instantiate multiple objects, you generally want to construct it in a way that just doesn't use simple object literal syntax. Instead, you want it to be more dynamic, such that you have something set up so that from that, whatever you have, whatever structure you have, you can easily create multiple objects from there with different values for their different properties. Now, I'm not going to go into inheritance, even though it's really important, I think, because I think we're going to start covering that later on, and I'll do some mini lectures for that. But I'd highly recommend at this point to take a look, well, not at this point, sorry, at the end of this lecture, to take a look at that documentation I sent out, because that will start going into the inheritance. Right now, we're going to go into object creation using constructor functions. So this is a constructor function. And like I mentioned before, it's just meant to emulate the class-based behavior that you see that other programming languages have. And what really happens in this background is that this is just a function inside JavaScript. But what it does is it allows you to then create objects from it. So essentially, it acts as a pattern that creates objects. So notice that this is very similar to what we had over here. So our digital pal over here is instead now capitalized, and it is made into a named function. So can anyone remember what difference between an anonymous and a named function is? So you guys can just type it out or just blurt it out. No idea. That's a good one. No, Marcos, you know this. Correct. An anonymous function has no name, right? So just like in Game of Thrones, he has no name. Kivanch, why didn't we write those hungry, sleepy, born, age in arguments? I mean, not in the side parentheses. So the question is, why don't we have these values set into parameters for digital pal? So in this case, let's see. I don't think these needed any inputs. No arguments were being passed to change these. Instead, the methods would change these different values. So it depends on what the construct is, right? If you have a constructor function that uses parameters, that means that you're trying to use some kind of either dynamic or system-based input to then replace the parameters with arguments that would then replace these different values over here. Right now, these are just manually set to like false and true. So these are the default parameters. Another way to set default parameters, does anyone remember? This is a pretty good one. Anyone know how to set default parameters? There's a crappy way that I was doing, which is my old school way, and there's a better, newer way of doing it. Are if and else functions considered anonymous? If and else are not functions. They're conditional statements. Yes, Ben, hungry equals false in arguments. Correct. So if you do hungry equals false and set that up, then what happens is if someone passes in hungry, so instead I'll do this. And remember, on the left-hand side, these are considered what? Are these the values being passed in? No, right? They're representative of the properties, correct. They are the properties of the object that are going to be created. So these, again, are the properties. Same thing as over here. Instead, we use this. This represents context. Context meaning the object that is going to be created from this pattern is going to be referenced to as this. So you're creating how many properties here? 4, correct. And the values for those properties, the values come in as either preset, like we did over here, or they're set as parameters that are getting passed in from the function and then get replaced by arguments being passed by either the system or by the user, right? So an example of a system-based change are these. These are all system-based, right? You're making instantiations of the object from the system. There's no user creating the dog. There's no user changing outside to false. Bark is another method being called. This is getting a little bit too much too fast, so let me just go back here and let me backstep. So let's go back to the parameters. So this is one way and a better way of setting a default parameter. So what happens here is if you set hungry equals false, if no one passes in a value for hungry, so either by the system, meaning the programmer, or by the end user, whoever is using this, this function, then if nothing is set, then hungry would be set to false. Otherwise, this hungry property on digital.pal for the instantiated from object from digital.pal will be set to the value. So we only have one going in, but we don't really need these. So what I'm going to do is close that off. So we don't need any parameters, right? Remember that we're changing all of these based on the method calls, right? So this one's a little bit different than other constructor functions that we've worked with. Any questions so far? I went over a lot in a very short amount of time. I'll wait a few seconds. All right, so over here we have properties. Each one of these are keys, but these are a little bit different, right? These are properties that are considered methods. And what differentiates a method from a simple function?
That it's within an object?
Correct. That the function is tied to an object is what makes it a method, right? Otherwise, it's just considered a normal function. Now, the scope of this method is tied to the object that gets instantiated. So if I say this dot feed, this is going to be the instantiated object dot feed. So if I did, let's see. Where's dog? It says, are methods usually native to the program? Native to the program? Sorry, could you clarify? So console.log is part of JavaScript. Console.log, so .log is a method on the console object. And that is a native object and a native method. Correct. They're native methods and objects, but methods could be host objects, like if you have methods, they could be host methods or native methods. It all depends on context. There's so many that are, like jQuery is all created methods that are host methods for just jQuery that are built on top of a lot of native methods from JavaScript. I wouldn't get too worried about that right now. So are methods only in object-oriented programs? That's a good question. I think you have methods plenty in object-oriented and non-object-oriented programming. So like in C, you still have methods, but that you don't really have to worry about, because if you're going through like web development, you're mostly going to be working with object-oriented programming languages. So like the lowest level you probably have to work with is like C++. Right. Okay, so we have different methods. We have this.feed, we have this.sleep, we have this.play, and we have this.increase age. And let me look at a different example. So instead of using this, we have var dog equals new digital pal. And I think this is the one that you guys are used to, and that's why I kind of lost track of this one. This one's a little bit more confusing, so let's just go to the one not using this. So instead, let's just use the common var dog equals new digital pal. So we have this digital pal, and we have different methods. These methods are able to change the values of different properties when they're called. And they have conditional statements that run to determine if they can be called or not, right? So if you're bored and you call play, then these will change. Otherwise, it's going to say, not right now, maybe later, right? If you do this.increase age, it just increments age by 1. This is assuming that age is an integer or float property that it can just increase incrementally. And the console.log statement allows you to then use string interpolation to then display the age of the whatever you're trying to increase the age of. So some kind of digital pal. And again, the digital pal abstraction, notice that this is a constructor function. How can you tell that it's a constructor function as opposed to a regular function? I mean, functionally they work the same way, right? But what text here differentiates the two? Capitalization, correct. So if we have something that's capitalized with this capital D digital pal as opposed to camel case, what happens is the programmer is able to understand that, oh, hey, this is a constructor function. Therefore, I know that it's going to be used to construct objects from. Excellent. Okay, so from here we have this instantiation. Notice that we're using var dog equals new digital pal. If you set without new, what happens is that this context actually becomes it attaches itself to a global object. In Node, that is not window. I think the most global object is like process or something. I forget. But if you did this in the browser, this would attach itself to the window object. So make sure you guys are using new. So the new keyword followed by the digital pal. Now, these empty parentheses just means that I'm not passing in any arguments. And again, we don't need to because we don't have any parameters to replace the arguments with. So I did dog equals new, dog.outside equals false. Again, I'm able to do the same thing at this point with manipulating the object that I am with creating objects from the object literal syntax. So I'm able to get and set the information in the same manner. I did show how to set new values, but I didn't show how to get values. I only showed how to display all of the information in the object. So why don't we get a value? So over here, we've set a value. What did we set the property, and what is the value we set that to? So line 57. What is the property that we set to change its value? Correct. Outside is the property, or the key in this case, and the value that we changed it to was false. Okay. So if I want to get the value of doc.outside, what do I put inside this console.log statements? So far, Northwestern is beating out the UCLA students. You could do dog, but I want to see, yes, dog.outside. Excellent. So if I do dog.outside, that should display the information how I want it to. So if I run this program, if I just execute it on Node Tamagotchi, yes, notice that I see false, which is the information I want. And nothing else is being console.log, so that's all we see, which is great. So now what I'm going to do is comment that out. Now, this is actually not a good way of being able to retrieve and set information. So normally you use functions, or in this case, methods to get and set properties. You normally see this in good applications that have the right constructors and say like, okay, well, if you're going to set something, then you're going to use something like this. So if I want to do, hungry, if hungry can be changed and it's not a constant, then what I'm going to do is do this dot get set hungry, and then what I can do is set hungry. So this would be and this would be a better way of doing it because this actually protects the value and doesn't make it so easy to change. So now if I want to set the value of hungry, I have to call the method set hungry and pass that function or that method a value in order to change it. The same thing goes for getting hungry. So this would retrieve it, and again, this prevents it from being, too open. You want to maintain that that data integrity. So you don't want to accidentally change anything. You want these to be these properties to be too open to the public. So instead, you set these to use getters and setters, and just a better way of doing things. So instead of directly changing things, I can now use these getters and setters, which are just basic functions that only perform one thing, which is setting a value and getting a value. Another thing that you can do for setting values is you can create some data validations, right? So you can say if value is something, right? Equals type of, string or something like that. Then you can do the following. Otherwise, don't let it. So you can actually put data validations this way as well. So it becomes really a lot better way of changing information. And you can also set conditional statements that say like, okay, if you're an admin user, then only retrieve this information, et cetera, et cetera. So there's something to think about. Don't worry about it too much right now, but it is something to understand as a concept. Any questions about that so far? Cool. All right. Let's keep going. So we have other methods. So notice that these are methods, but they're not being called. What's happening here on line 60 to 62? Is this a method call or is it a method declaration? Just 60 to 62. You guys can't see this?
It's creating that method.
Correct. So that's a method declaration, right? So, or a function declaration. In this case, it's a method declaration, right? So correct, you guys are right. This is a declaration because I'm defining it. But not only am I defining it, I'm adding it to this dog. So I add this method declaration and I say, okay, console.log woof woof, right? So I have another method that I've added to it on runtime, meaning that it's not being added from the constructor function, but after the constructor function is made and during the execution of the code. So we have dog.letOutside, which is another method, and we've added this, and we've added another one too. Now, this is, it's good that you can do this. It's not necessarily something that you should do. If you are going to dynamically add methods on runtime, I would suggest that you do it right after the constructor function and that you'd add them as prototypes. If you add these afterwards, you run the risk of, let's say that you have some other code that you're running in here. You don't want to dynamically add methods after other code is executing. So just a better way, and it's not as clean to put these on the outside as well. Again, unless you're using prototyping to dynamically add information to the constructor's prototype. So over here, we just have some other calls. So these, oh, I apologize. Actually, this is not using, this is not adding it to the constructor. This is adding it to the object itself. My apologies. For some reason, I was thinking of prototyping. This is adding the bark method, let outside, let inside to just the dog. So if we take a look at the dog object that gets instantiated, these are added to just that dog. So it's not added to the constructor. This is just added to that object itself. That was my mistake. Over here, we have the cat, and we have different methods being added. And these are just being added to the instantiated object, cat. So we have two different objects over here. We have dog and we have cat. And each of these has a whole different set of different methods on each of these. So if we were to console.log dog and console.log cat, and let's see, can I console.log digital pal? Then we should see some differences in there. All right, so let's see. Oh, in order to display this, dot stringify two. Okay. Defined. Why isn't it letting me display the whole thing? Digital pal JSON.parse, but it's already an object. It's a function call. That's why. Let's see. It's a function call. Did parse? I don't think so. Let's see. Okay. No. Yeah, it's a function call, so I wouldn't be able to do that. All right. Let's just go with this for now. So basically, digital pal is a function. If I want to see dog.prototype, let's see if that works. Oh, can I use dunder? Digital pal, but it's not showing me anything inside of it. Let's see. Digital pal. God damn it. All right. I'll look up documentation later. Let's see. Digital pal to string. Does that work? God, I hate doing this. Perfect. Thank you, Nicholas. All right. Yeah. So I just converted the function to a string. Thank you. All right. So we have digital pal over here, and that has dog, I believe. So dog is the first one, and dog is an instantiated object from the constructor digital pal, and that has additional methods on top of the feed, sleep, and play, and increase age, or it should. Let me double check. Feed, sleep, play, increase age. Yeah, so it has outside, bark, let outside, let inside. So let's see. Cat should then have. So cat, notice that it says digital pal, and that's just because it's instantiating an object from this constructor. So you're still seeing digital pal, but it's actually a completely different object. This has the methods hungry, sleepy, bored, age, feed, sleep, play, same thing as we saw in this constructor function. But additionally, we should have what new methods on cat?
Destroy furniture and buy new furniture.
Buy new furniture and
Destroy furniture.
well, you said destroy furniture, and then you said buy new furniture, and there's one more. Meow.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So right here, meow, destroy furniture, buy new furniture. Right. So we see that over here. So we see meow, destroy furniture, buy new furniture. Katie says meow. Yes. Thank you, Juan. All right. So this is thanks to Nicholas. We got a way to see the function. So this is the function itself in string format. So if we have this dot hungry, this dot sleepy, this dot bored, this dot age, and it has a whole bunch of stuff, but it doesn't have the functions that were, or sorry, the methods that were added to dog and cat. So you see the difference between them, right? Any questions so far? You guys are responding like you're SEAL Team 6. Negative. Roger that. All right. Swole Team 6. Get out of here. It's all about SEAL Team Rick. Big Hero 6. All right. So if no one has any questions about that, I'm going to move on to, let's see. Close? You're talking about the homework? Oh, we'll get into the homework at the end. And I'll take you through exactly how to solve it. Just kidding, I'm definitely not going to do that. So, question for one of the topics. Would you be able to give a run through on how the flashcard homework is supposed to work? The instructions are kind of vague. Yeah, so I will go over that towards the end. I'll go over like me running the program. And I think the one that I ran for my students was the bonus. So I run the bonus and the non-bonus too. I'll definitely share the answer, yeah. I'm just gonna say a bunch of random nonsense to throw you guys off. All right. So we have, let's see, 3 programmers loop, team manager. Let's do team manager because that one was pretty complicated. All right. So team manager use recursion, and this is our first usage of recursion, but it wasn't too bad. So let's go through that one. CD programmers loop recursion Node.js. Oh, what am I doing? Hold on. Get rid of this. Okay. So this is an in-class activity that you guys did to create some sports teams. So you guys could have had soccer teams, basketball teams, esports teams, whatever you guys want, right? As long as there's 5 players and 3 subs. So this was using a case where we have a constructor function that does take in parameters. And this is probably what you are used to, right, Kavanch? I'm just going to say yes for him. Indeed, yes. Andy is the new Kavanch. So the difference between this program and the other one was that now we're incorporating a node module, and this node module is Inquirer. Now, is Inquirer a native node module, or is it an external package? External, yes. Dude, the Northwestern guys are killing it. UCLA, you guys need to step up. All right. So, yes, so the first thing that you need to do is if you had to use it, then Ben is mentioning. One. That's true. That's true. It is, everyone's a winner, but I want to make sure that you guys are paying attention. I think these guys are very engaged. And I think I know that you guys all know, I think you guys all mostly know this stuff, but I want you to be, engaged in the chat and everything. I'm not going to hand out more Pocky sticks. I spoiled you guys already. Let's see. Yeah, we give up Pocky. And what was the other one? Nature bars or some shit? Kind, yeah. I don't know. Whatever. Hippie bars. Yeah, I'll do that tomorrow. All right. So we have this Inquirer. Oh yeah, don't count me on that. I'm definitely lying. And we have, let's see, this one. So this one's actually using the prototype. So the prototype that we've used so far is basically saying, okay, I'm adding this information to the prototype. And what that does is it saves its memory. So you might be wondering, it's like, why the hell do I need that? It's not actually that necessary for smaller programs, or if you're not going to be instantiating a lot of objects. Like if you're instantiating like, maybe 5 objects or something, it's not really that big of a deal. And especially if you're instantiating on the client side or even or server side or whatever, most browsers are able to handle memory pretty well. But if you're instantiating a lot of objects in an environment that you need a lot, you need to optimize your memory, then what happens is, in the background, every time a new object gets instantiated, you're including that object with all of its values within the object itself, along with the methods that you have in the constructor. So if you're using constructor to construct objects and you're putting the methods in here, so if I put this.printinfo with all of this, and the method call, meaning that the information inside of it, when I call the function, if everything's the same, then I can just put it in the constructor functions prototype, which is basically the object, right? So if you have the programmer, this is going to be what? What is programmer referring to? The constructor function. Yes, so the constructor function is going to be let's see. So the constructor function is going to be where all of our objects are going to be created from. So this is the prototype for all of our instantiated objects, right? So let's see, programmer's loop. Oh, this one's not the team manager, is it? Let's go to the team. Well, actually, no, this one's more important to go through first. So let's go to, let's do, can you also go through inquirer? Yeah. So this one gets instantiated based on inquirer prompts, and the inquirer, oh, right. This is the recursion one. So let's go through inquire to make this happen. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just execute, let's see, recursion. So this is programmer's loop. God, look at all these different variations. Okay, programmer. Can I see? Yes, I'm not blind. All right, so who is your daddy and what does he do? Mr. or the governor. There you go. Governor. Current position. My current position is apparently Bob Marley. How old are you? What is your favorite programming language? Python. Oh, there's also another programming language called Arnold C, and it's a C-based language where all the commands are done using Arnold Schwarzenegger quotes. So you guys got to check that out. Now, what's happening here is notice that we have multiple questions asked through inquirer. So inquirer is a package that allows us to input information in a more dynamic fashion rather than just using process.argv. So process is a global object that exists in the Node environment, and the argv is a property on that stores information into that property as an array. But instead of that, we use inquirer as a package to gather information in a nicer fashion, right? If you're creating command line applications, then you probably don't want to be like, okay, this is where you need to set the information, this is where you need to do something. It's like, no, just give it to the user and let them just execute it and be able to run it pretty easily. So when you execute this program, it asks for your information. And notice that it's going in some kind of loop, right? So it's asking a multitude of times. So we use recursion to solve this issue, I think on the Wednesday, Thursday class. So it should be the same thing for you guys as well. If we do it using recursion, and notice that you wouldn't be able to loop through this. So if you use the for loop to execute the questions multiple times, how many ever times that you need, what is the issue that you run into? It shows the question that many times. No, not necessarily an infinite loop. An infinite loop would be if you ran like a while loop or something and never exited out of it. But if it's a for loop, it's a finite amount of times. Right, so all the questions go through the screen and they're all executed at once. And the only reason that they're showing up one at a time, I mean, it's still like, a bunch of things one at a time, is because of inquirer's functionality. So it makes it stop each time, but it's actually executing everything at once. So you don't want that to happen. In order for this not to happen, what we do is we use recursion, because inquirer is a asynchronous call. So what happens is you're saying, okay, once you get this information, then, so what happens is you have this promise that gets returned. And what happens is you have this instantiation of an object. And then you, print the information from the new guy that gets instantiated. And then you increase the count by 1. And then look at this part over here. So it says ask question. this whole thing is wrapped in a function called askQuestion. And this is the concept of recursion, where you're calling the same function within the function itself. Now, this would normally run an infinite amount of times, right? If you just did like a while loop and just, if you just did, askQuestion and you never had a conditional statement that would make it stop, this could run in the infinite loop circumstance that I think Andy was mentioning. Yeah, don't worry about recursion from Google. There's a lot of ways that you can go about it. This is a very simplistic way of going about recursion. And this is definitely like a good interview question. This isn't a classical example of recursion, but this does give you the concept of it, meaning that there's a conditional statement to stop the recursive call and the recursive call itself. So you have this conditional statement that stops the recursive call. What happens is you first start off with a count of 0. From there, you check to see what the count is. If it's less than 5, then you continue with this. However, what you're doing in here is you're increasing count each time, and therefore you're going to end up with this conditional statement not being met, meaning that you're going to hit this else statement that says all questions are asked. So any questions about this before we move on? Okay, so this is a simple version of what we did with the team manager. Did anyone want me to be covering the team manager, or did you guys want me to move on from there?
What is the team manager assignment again?
Remember the in-class assignment where we created a bunch of players and substitutes? It's basically a variation on this.
I kind of, with that assignment, I was interested in kind of going over the ability to switch players in and out. That little method.
Okay, so let's do that. So I'm just gonna cancel out, and let's just go to for team manager. Let's go to team manager advanced. Oh, what am I doing? I keep trying to CD into it. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, so if we have substitutes, let's see, this is not a bad game. All right, so we have the inquire module again. We have the constructor function. Player has all these different properties and values. We have these methods, good game, bad game, print stats. Any questions about that so far? Nope. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do is, what we start off with is creating some empty arrays. So instantiating some arrays, and then we instantiate this variable with 0. So score is going to be an integer, starters and subs is going to be arrays. So this is a recursive function which allows the users to create 5 starters and 3 substitution players. So what happens is if you execute the create player, then the first conditional statement will say, well, okay, if starters.length plus subs.length is less than 8, so length is a property on the array, and it can check how many elements there are in the array. And if those combine less than 8, because remember that we're trying to have less than 8 players, right? You can have a maximum of 8, 5 for starters, 3 for subs. Any confusion on that part? Yeah, you have to combine them. All right, well, I mean, this is just one way of going about it, but this is a good way of doing it. So you have inquire.prompt, and this just gives you a nice display of, hey, it's a new player, right? You put in the player's name, position, offensive ability. You do some data validations. Validate is a method that's built into inquire that allows you to do some data validations. And let's see. This one is saying the number needs to be between, it needs to be a number. The value needs to be between 1 and less than or equal to 10. I think it's, yeah, that's good. Yeah. So basically it's between 1 and 10. And if it is, then, you know, it'll be fine. Otherwise, the validate function or the method will basically just say like, all right, sorry, you can't do that. And the same thing for defense. Now, again, when inquire is done, then the promise is executed. So you have the callback function, and this is an anonymous function, which takes in the answers object. So this is just an object, can be named anything. But can anyone tell me what the answers contains? This is like not something you should memorize, but just based on what you guys have worked on. Yeah, the data from inquire, right? So it's just going to store properties and values inside of inquire, from what inquire was asking for based on user input. So if you have, you know, let's see, name, position, offense, defense, they're all going to be stored as properties inside answers, or whatever object you want to name it. And the values are going to be whatever the user returned for each one. Now, what you can do is now you can dynamically instantiate new objects based off of the player constructor. So from here, you have the player is equal to a new player. Then you have some conditional statements, and you say, okay, if starters.length is less than 5, right? So if there's less than 5 starters to begin with, then put that player in the starters array. Otherwise, put into the subs array. And then this is recursively calling itself until it's greater than 8, right? Or not greater than 8, but until it's 8, right? 8 or larger. So if it's else, then what happens is you start the game, you play the game. So this executes this play game function. So before I go on, does anyone have any questions about that? All right. So play game takes in one argument. So the variable x here is used to keep track of rounds. So the first round is going to be set to 0 by default. So when it first executes, it's going to be set to 0. And then if x is less than 9 rounds, so you're going to run 10 rounds, right? They're starting off the index at 0. They could have started off at 1 and then not use indexing to keep track of rounds. But this is just another way of going about it, right? So using the programmatic way of counting, you start at 0. Now what happens is when you first start the round, it increases x by 1. So then x then becomes 1, so the round becomes 1. So now it shows round 1. Now technically it started off at round 0, but you're doing this before the round and you're going up to 9. So it's going to show round 1. From here, you're going to do the offense and defense random. You just do math at random. You compare the scores against each other. And here's the part about substitution I think that people are confused about. So after you check the scores, you know, also pont is not a thing, it's points. Then you have this inquire prompt, right? So if you want to substitute out, then you just say, okay, well, I'm going to have something that says confirm. And this is a Boolean. So you just type in yes or no if you like to make a substitution. This is built into inquire. Say, hey, if answer.confirm is equal to true or that, same thing, then what happens is another inquire.prompt runs and says, okay, who do you want to sub in? And the choices are going to be the subs. So it's just going to display everything from the array. And the choice that you chose from subs is going to be passed into the sub in object. So what this does, it finds a player object with a subs array with the same name that matches the user's choice and places it within the sideline variable. Goes through it, and it just goes through and substitutes it. So now it's asking, who do you want to sub out? All right, so you then go through this inquire thing, and you just say, okay, well, this is the person I'm going to take out. And the replacement is going to be replaced by the one that you set over here. So basically, this is just a little switcheroo. So this is going to take the starters and subs and just use them to switch out each other in this little piece of code over here. It is a bit tricky, but if you take a look at it, it's actually something that we've done before. Like we've done the whole switcheroo thing where it's like, oh, do you want this to replace this and these two arrays? Then here, you have to go through this one, find this index, replace it with this one. Any questions about this?
Is this a method that happens after each game runs, or can you call this method like, hey, we're losing, I want to make a switch? Or...
You can do it if you're losing, but this is run on runtime. So at the end of each round, this runs. So if you did want it to call, like let's say that your offense random, if you wanted to put this whole thing in a function, you can. And so what you can do is put this whole part over here into a function and put this part as well. So this would be all of this, inquire. And then what you could do is say like, you know, let's say that you just lost or you're losing by X amount of points, then you make the function call. So you can have a whole bunch of like if-else statements that say like, okay, these are the times when I can execute this function. And the rest of it is just as it was. Any questions about that? All right. So let's go on to IE, Internet Explorer. Oh, okay. All right, 11.3, and we get to the activities over here, and we have the completed. No means no inspect. Thank you, appreciate that. Just learning so much. All right, so this is the completed application that we worked on in class. So if we have modularization, what does modularization mean and why do we need it? What is this concept of modularization? Maintain code, right? Yeah. What are some benefits from modularization? How does it help you maintain code? Besides maintaining code, what else does it do? It does make it easier to read. So it doesn't all run at once, correct?
I think about it like Legos and rebuilding your site in different ways that fit the needs.
Yep. Definitely. Easier to debug, definitely. Debugging and testing, definitely. And then Mario, one thing that you mentioned that, in class, but that you didn't mention right now. What's another reason?
I didn't say it right now. Just being able to rearrange things.
Not just rearrange. I mean, that is a core part of modularization. Yes, teamwork. Yes, so definitely teamwork. So it helps you collaborate easier, right? So even though we use Git to maintain, so that everyone can work on the same thing at the same time, it leads to less merge conflicts if you spread out your code, right? If everyone's working on the same file, yes, Git allows you to do that, but then it becomes hell trying to work on those merge conflicts. So if you spread it out, it becomes easier to maintain. You also have this separation of concern. All right, so all good answers. Great work, guys. So what I'm going to do here is display CLI. So this is a pretty good example of how to use modularization because it makes it pretty easy. We went through this step by step on Saturday where we did, okay, the CLI, or first we did the architecture, how the application is going to look. And remember, this application was such that if you have the CLI.js, what's supposed to happen is someone, and this is like, a very basic application, it's just meant for like testing purposes. If someone puts in their username, their location, and that they are a user, then what happens is their information gets logged to a log.txt file, and their information goes into a weather search node module, and it displays the weather for them in object format. So it's not even displaying in a very nice format, it's just very basic. And I like that because you're not actually going into like, cleaning up the code too much. You're going into a very basic application to build within a very short amount of time. Very good MVP. You also have the other ability, which is that if your argument is instead, let's see, it's your third argument that you pass in. So not your node, not your application name, but whether or not you're an admin or a user. So if you type an admin, what it does is it actually reads through your files. I think it reads through your log.txt and displays all the information in there. And the information that was put in there was from the user, right? So when the user put in their information, there's some code in the background that goes in and puts in, I believe it was the username, the location, and the current time using date.now in milliseconds since January 1st, 1970. So that is the information that gets displayed, and again, a very simplistic way, but a very good way of being able to create a very simple application. So what we did was we abstracted this, right? So this is a good way of modularizing all of our code. We said, okay, our first one, CLI.js, that's just going to take in our inputs. And so all we have to do is process inputs. So in here, we just said, okay, we're going to use weather admin. And this is one way of going about it. And weather admin, what it's going to do is it's going to contain the constructor function that's going to be generated. And this constructor function will then have two methods. One, which allows us to then get the information from log.txt, and another method, which allows us to do a new user search. One of those two options. All right, so Andy has a question. So when I did this app, I use a switch statement. For example, would it be better to use an if or, you can use a switch statement too, it's fine. Switch and if else. Switch is usually used when you're doing a lot of different statements. So if else can get like really long. So for cleanliness, I use switch statements in that case. But it's really up to you. I'm not really strict on the if else and switch. If you're going through like 50 conditionals, first you might want to rethink how you're writing your code. But if it's absolutely necessary, then it's probably better to do a switch statement. All right. So if we go into our weather admin, notice that we required it. And from Node, you have to use this dot /. This represents where we currently are. And this is the path to it. If it's a JavaScript file, it does not need to have the extension at the end. It's assumed. So if we go to our weather admin, we use this CommonJS let's see, what is it called? CommonJS. God. Now it's starting to get late, and I'm starting to get old. Okay. CommonJS. There we go. So CommonJS is what our require modules is based on. It's a module format. So this is what our require and exports is based off of. So if you guys want to take a look at that, it's pretty interesting. But that's what we have built into Node. Now, we also have a newer way of doing that with ES6 that we're not going to cover until later on in the course. There's some really cool things about ES6. There's some things that are just really just syntactic. A lot of it actually is syntactic sugar. But there are some good things. You know, like let allows you to have more scope for variables. Constants are actually constants. So there's some interesting stuff that does add functionality. But we're going to get into using the import modules as opposed to just requiring them. And so that's going to be the ES6 version. So just keep that in mind that later on we are going to be using a different variation on this, but that you can still use the require version, which is definitely supported. So right now what happens is that we are setting the module.exports object to then equal this weather admin function. Now we're just passing it by reference. We're not executing it inside export. We're just saying that, hey, this variable is going to have this variable is going to contain a function. And when you call it, you can just call the whole function. Now this function is what type of function? Can anyone tell me? Constructor function, yes. So this is a constructor function. So how do you determine if it's a constructor function or not? Yeah, capitalization, right? Yeah, all caps. So thank you, Juan. Appreciate that. Just get into a bad internet argument. I like that you used the wrong spelling too, just to prove that you got in a bad internet argument. All right. So we have two methods, like we mentioned, get data and new user search. So these methods allow you to get information and instantiate objects and append files and get weather, right? So the first method, all it does is read the file from log.txt, get it in UTF-8 format, and display that data to the console. Pretty straightforward for get data. New user search, this was interesting because we used a module that was imported that was instantiating an object from a constructor, and this itself has a method to instantiate objects. So you notice that because we're doing this, this inception type of instantiation, we then had to get this user search method, user search function from the module user search. And this is actually a good way of doing it because you can then modularize different constructor functions into their own files and use them wherever you need to use them. And when you guys get into React, everything is like, modularized into its own packages. And so this concept of modularization is not going to decrease, it's actually increase as we get into the course. So notice that over here, remember that even though this says new user search, this variable doesn't stay with us. So we can keep using it over and over for each new user search. So what is this variable scope to? How long does it last in memory? This is line 16, new user search. How long does this variable stay in memory? not to the admin scope, but to the, think about the application itself, think about the file. Not always, that would be a global variable, right?
For the current login?
Well, this variable actually only exists on the execution of the method. After that, the variable is done. So remember, this is scoped just to this. Now, you can have a variable with values that, whatever values it has, get returned. If you return it, then you can increase the scope of that variable outside of the function. Think about function scope. It's actually a very big part of scope because in JavaScript, before let, the only real scope was within functions, right? So this variable exists only within the execution of this function. And unless you return that, that variable, you essentially lose that variable. Does that make sense? Hopefully let's review. All right, yar. I don't know if that was Indian or if that was pirate. Maybe like an Indian pirate. Oh, okay. Why not both? Why not? All right, so this one, what it does is allows you to append the file, and it just adds the log.txt, which is a variable that contains all this information. And then user search does a get weather, and then this variable is gone, right? Now, why is this actually good? Why do you not want this to exist for so long? It's going to be a very simple answer. Personal data, yeah. Security, cool, yes, absolutely. Another thing too. But what's more important than that? I mean, well, not more important, but in terms of like, when it comes to running applications, what are we always concerned about? Security is never important. Memory, holy crap, all you guys wrote that at the exact same time. Yes, memory. So if you have everything just being stored, then memory starts being used up, and then you have a really slow application, and then no one likes you anymore. So don't do that, right? So we have that luckily built into function scope where it exists during the execution. After that, it's like peace, right? Unless you return it. Okay, so with that, and I'm not going to go through user search. Well, let's just quickly, I guess, here. User search, it's basically just constructing a function. It has a method called getWeather. It will just retrieve weather, and it has name, location, date.now. So nothing too complicated about this one. This one you guys know how to do already. But remember, it's the same module.exports that you have to add to.
Question.
Yeah.
Why didn't you put module.exports at the top and just a different way?
I could have just done this, yeah. So I could have done module.exports equals, wait, no, dot. Oh, I forgot the syntax. Is it dot user search? I think that's right. Might be wrong. I'm pretty sure it's something like this. And that should be, I think that's it, yeah. So that's just another way of doing it. I like this way because it's just nice and clean. It's like, oh, this is the function itself, and this is me exporting it. Whatever you guys want. In that case, I don't really care. Like you can just do module.exports equals user search. One difference is that if you're just making it equal to user search, then you're setting this whole function to be that. If you do module.exports, I think it's like this, then what you're doing is you're setting a property to equal this, and you can add additional things to module.exports. All right. So Now we get to homework. Where's the homework? All right. Got my legal pad right. Why do you have a legal pad? I don't even know what that means. Like a legitimate thing? I think it's called a notepad. 11 by 17. God. Notepad is achieved. Okay, so you guys want the solution, right? It's right there. So definitely not going to look into that. Actually, well, I'm going to go into it just to show what the files are going to look like. That's fine. Definitely not. So we have, let's see, close JSON. This includes the bonus. Does it not include the non-bonus? All right, so let me do execute the basic card and close card. So let me do basic card. George ... was the first president of the United States. George Michael. The ... was an agreement signed by British and American leaders. Tupac. The was a religious sect, English religious sect. The Who. Wait, sorry, that was repetitive. In 1807, the Fancy Act. The Super War. Thomason. And none of those answers were correct. So it tells us that the game is over and your score is 0. If you want to play again, then this is just going to be a confirm from Inquirer. So if I put yes, then it'll be good. And it'll play again. Hit no, and does that. All right. Now let's go to close card bonus. So I run that. Close card. George was the first. Blah 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 blah. I don't care. All right. So what happens with the close card is it actually gives the information back to you each time. It gives the information back to you with the closure. So this actually has a close interpolated into a string and returned back, as opposed to this one, which just gives you the correct answer back. So the basic one is the correct answer is Edison. The closed one is the Treaty of Paris. So it fills in this ellipsis with the correct answer and then returns that string back to you. So it's actually relatively simple. It looks like it's really hard, but it's actually not too bad. Right, just like basic Inquirer stuff. Yeah, I guess it's just like two separate ones.
Question.
Yeah.
All right, so we're doing this stuff on the terminal. Will in job will we be using the command line terminal, or will we be using some other software to interact on the back end?
That's a large answer.
Okay.
So yes, we'll be using the command line a lot, mostly for Git, interacting with packages through Node. If you are using Node, if you're using other languages, like if you end up using Ruby with Rails, then you're going to be using Ruby gem installers and stuff like that. If you're going to be using Python, it's going to be the same thing. So you're going to be using the terminal a lot, but not for executing programs with Node a lot. You're going to mostly be running servers and things like that from like the CLI. What we're doing right now is creating command line applications just to get you used to using Node. And then we're going to start using Node with a server, I think, starting tomorrow. So we're going to start using Node with the Express web framework. And then we're going to get into using handlebars for the view. I'm not so picky with which view template you guys use. Like if you guys want to use Jade, go ahead and use Jade. If you guys want to use EJS, use EJS. I don't really care. You guys, we're going to use handlebars, just like Andy mentioned with his bicycle. And we're also then going to go into MySQL, and we're going to use an ORM, or object relational modeling, called Sequelize. So again, I'd highly suggest Team Treehouse. They do a really good job. They have some really good modules on this. It costs $25 a month, but it does explain things in a very basic way. And you can split the cost between, different students. So do you guys have any questions so far on anything? It's been like an hour and a half. I'm sure a lot of you guys are exhausted of this. A most helpful review. Andy, you sound like you're from the 18th century. But thank you. Indubitably. Doesn't need to ask, what the hell is that? Someone sounds like a chipmunk. One of you guys sounds like a chipmunk. I don't know who that is. Alvin. Who is that? Oh, it's okay. Go fuck yourselves. All right. So, which card style you want? There's a basic and closed one. So I think you guys have to do both of those. I have to double check the homework instructions, but just go through the instructions, and if it says do both, then do both. Son of a bitch, who's doing that? All right. So, John J. Okay. Hello? Okay, there we go. I muted him. Yeah, John, your mic was just like mocking me. All right, so if there's no other questions, all right, let's see. So the main JS doesn't have to inquire which version you want. I don't remember the instructions here. Let's go to the instructions. That's weird. I guess it doesn't. I thought it did, but let's go to it real quick. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, this is odd. It doesn't actually have the constructor. It just allowed me to execute it based on existing ones. Yeah, instead of process.argv, basically it's going to be inquire, but I'm just going through this, blah, 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 blah. I think it's just a quiz type thing. That's what it seems like. Yeah, I don't see any part that says that you should be creating new cards. It's just like quizzing the user on existing ones. Then the constructor actually generates new ones based on information. Oh, no, right here. All right, here we go. The backend will essentially constitute an API that allows users to create two types of flashcards. So I'm not sure why the solution doesn't mention that. It just quizzes me on existing ones. All right, hold on. Let me stop sharing. So I'm going to stop sharing. And let me take the solution. Because that doesn't make any sense. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So there's other ones instead of lib. And the solution is kind of weird. I think I know what it's doing. Yeah. FS. Huh. So it's just getting it from the JSON file. I see. Got it. Okay. So what we saw was information coming from an imported basic JSON file. So all the information was already preset in those JSON files. So there is, I think the reason it was called bonus was because the executables were just going off of existing data, assuming that they were already put into JSON files. So JSON files just contain, let's see, objects that contain either front and back or partial and close. So each of these JSON files are an array of objects, and the objects all contain front and back, yeah, and partial and close for basic.json and close.json respectively. The lib contains to a basic card.js and a closed card.js. These are the instantiation, or sorry, these are the constructor functions that will actually generate the cards. So the assumption is that these constructor functions already created these cards and put them into the JSON files. Although I don't know why they set this up for the solution this way. I think this would confuse students. Yeah. So let's see, basic card data, basic card. I don't know why this is still running basic JSON. So what's happening is the basic card bonus and the closed card bonus, each of those are using the constructor functions from basic card and closed card respectively, and they're getting the information through a loop and constructing new basic cards from the JSON file, rather than using the constructor function from inquire. So I think what it does is it allows you to have, like, let's say that you wanted to create like a preset version of flashcards. Then it generates cards from the preset data and just converts the data into cards. I would actually prefer that you guys create the cards on the fly from data based on the inquirer prompt. What that means is that lib just means library, yeah. I think a much easier one would be that, actually, rather than trying to like abstract it or whatever. So basically a way to do this would be you would have two files, so you'd have four files altogether, one for basic JSON constructor, basic card constructor, one for closed card constructor. You'd have a closed card executable, you'd have a basic card executable. The basic card executable would then use the basic card constructor function to then generate. First, it would ask. It would basically say, like, inquire, like, okay, like, what kind of cards do you want to create? And then it would say, like, or like, how many cards do you want to create? And you'd say like 10. And so what it'll do is it'll say, okay, the counter or the conditional statement for the inquire will run 10 times. So basically this will recursively run 10 times. So hopefully you'll go back to the recursion example with inquire, and you'll set the conditional statement to run X amount of times. So whatever the variable that's inputted from inquire is going to be. Then what you're going to do is you are going to get the information from inquire about what information is being put in, and you're going to generate cards from there. Based on that, you're then going to have another promise that's going to then execute your actual code that's going to ask the user to then put in the answers for the cards that they just created. So all of this is recorded, so don't worry if you didn't understand that. You can just go back on that. Any questions so far, though? It's actually not that difficult. Yeah, don't worry about the JSON file or JSON. Damn it, it's not JSON. It's JSON. No, damn it. All right, so JSON, yes, JSON. You guys are obsessed with the new Power Rangers movie. All right, any other questions? Cheeky bastards. All right. Can you send out number? No, definitely not. Anything else? All right. Well, I'm gonna go relax. So I'll catch you guys later. All right. Take care, and I'll upload the video games. Wait for what? Go away. What if I told you someone is fuck off? All right. See you guys. Bye.